Hello everyone, and welcome to this knowledge pool session on product-based planning. This is part of our Introduction to Project Management course. So our housekeeping rules are the same as usual. And my name is Tony Langdon. The purpose of this session is to understand the process and benefits of product-based planning. So we'll review what product-based planning is and why it's regarded as industry best practice. We'll practice an exercise in product-based planning, and we'll discuss the differences and similarities between product-based planning and the activity-based planning that we saw last week. And the payoff will be an understanding of how to use product-based planning and how it may be better than activity-based planning. So, product-based planning is a planning process that starts with the deliverable that a project has been set up to create. It's an approach that's particularly recommended as part of the PRINCE2 methodology, and it takes a different approach to product-based planning. Potentially it's a better method than activity-based planning because activity-based planning focuses on the tasks that need to be done, whereas product-based planning focuses on the things that need to be created. And in the same way that activity-based planning decomposes the required tasks into smaller and smaller tasks, product-based planning decomposes the project's main deliverables, also called the project product, into smaller products, subproducts. We'll document this decomposition of the product in the form of a product breakdown structure. Remember when we saw and looked at activity-based planning, we saw that what we created initially was something called a work breakdown structure. So this is similar. We're going to document the breakdown of the products that need to be created in the form of a product breakdown structure. And we can say that there's no right or wrong way to draw a product breakdown structure. They can be done as a hierarchy chart, a mind map, as a structured list. Any way is correct. It's also the case that there are many different ways of decomposing the same products. What we would say though is that it is vital that the sponsor, the steering group, and the project team, including any significant suppliers to the project, should all understand the product breakdown structure. This means that it's usually best to draw the product breakdown structure together. And there are some further tips on creating a product breakdown structure as we go through the presentation. So the most important thing to understand is that we start with the deliverable or deliverables that are needed. We break them down into smaller things that can be built and be delivered. And we document that breakdown in the form of a product breakdown structure. And we've emphasized that it's really important that all the key people working on the project and the sponsor and the steering group and any suppliers involved all understand the PBS, the product breakdown structure. Because if they don't, they're not going to understand how the product is trying to build the things it's trying to build. So it's really important that they understand it. And the best way that I've found to do that is to actually draw the product breakdown structure together. So look at what's needed, break it down into the smaller things that can be delivered, document your product breakdown structure, and then everybody understands what it's showing. Okay. So we're going to create a product breakdown structure for a project that we've met before. Last week, we looked at making a cup of tea for the boss. So with activity-based planning, we said we needed to decide on the approach of the project before we can start planning. And this is also the case with product-based planning. We need to decide on our approach because a different approach will result in different products. So the scenario here is exactly the same. Your boss is thirsty, they want a cup of tea. They've asked for a cup of tea with milk and sugar. And we're going to treat this as a project, and we're going to plan the delivery of a cup of tea using product-based planning. And to complete the scenario, it's exactly the same as last week. Your workplace is in a town centre. There are shops and cafes nearby, but you also have a kitchen with a fridge and a kettle, and everybody contributes to a tea club that makes sure there are tea bags, sugar and milk available in the kitchen. There are no drinks vending machines on the site. So in terms of a choice of approach, we could go out to a cafe and buy a cup of tea. That doesn't produce a very interesting product breakdown structure though, because we're buying the tea ready-made. The only thing we might have to do is add the milk and sugar. So we're going to make the tea in the kitchen, and we're going to draw the product breakdown structure while we talk and while we're in this session. So I'm going to switch to video, and hopefully you're seeing that. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second, just make sure we are seeing that video. So what I've started here is a video session where we've got just the project product, the thing we want the project to deliver at the top of the page. And what we need to do is we need to break this product down into some things that either can be created or that already exist. And one of the purposes of the product breakdown structure is to show the things that the project need that may already exist. This is perhaps one way in which it's a better approach than activity.
And also just more of a personal experience.
So, good evening, Atanook. So I've started the session, but just carry on.
Good evening. Sorry. Thank God I was able to join today because I had to put sorry, I had to. I'm also on another Zoom meeting by the program. Yeah. So well, I'm happy I'm joining today because I've missed a lot of class and I'm so sorry about that. I'm extremely sorry about that. But I've been able to watch the video and catch up with the class.
Oh, excellent.
And I really planned my time this week, but now I am coinciding with the apprentice program by the knowledge pool as well. And so I'm here today. I'm here today for
well
you.
Done. So,
and I can see lockdown is down. You've cut your hair. You look good.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, lockdown has ended here in Sheffield to some degree. So I've managed to get my hair cut. So that's a relief because it really was very long.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll carry on with the session. You can review the start of it, but we're starting to draw a product breakdown structure for a project that's about making a cup of tea for the boss. So we've got our project product on the screen, and what we need to do is we need to break this down into something that can be created or something that exists already. And if I can ask you to stay on mute if you're not talking as well, that will help. Thank you. So what do we yeah? So if you can go on mute, that would be helpful. Thank you. So what do we need if we're going to have a cup of tea with milk and sugar? Well, we need a cup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that box and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to call that a cup. And I'm going to put that to one side. So we've got a cup. What else do we need? Well, we need tea. And what I mean here by tea is we need brewed tea. So we need tea that has been made and that needs milk and sugar adding to it. So I'm going to duplicate this again, and I'm going to call the next product brewed tea. Now, at this stage, we're breaking down the project's product, and we're not worrying too much about how we get brewed tea. We know that we can create brewed tea, or we think we can create brewed tea, but at this stage, we're not worrying about how we're going to get that brewed tea. But we know that we need a cup and we need brewed tea. what else do we need? Well, we need milk and sugar. So I'm going to duplicate the brewed tea twice, and we'll call this milk. We'll call this sugar. And we're nearly there, but I'm going to say that we actually need something else in order to create a cup of tea with milk and sugar. So I'm going to say that we need a spoon as well, because we need to be able to stir the cup of tea. So I'm going to create as another product here called spoon. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some connectors on the diagram to show how these things are connected to each other. So using the connector link, I can draw an arrow just going to draw it from that point there. So I can draw an arrow down from the project product to a cup, and I can repeat that process for the other products. And this is showing how this product has been decomposed, how we've broken it down. Okay. So we've got a sort of layer there of products that we need, and we can say that we've broken down a cup of tea with milk and sugar into these 5 products. We need a cup, which already exists. We need some brewed tea, that doesn't exist. We need some milk, that's in the fridge. We need some sugar, that's in the cupboard. And we need a spoon, that's in the drawer. So if we can get all of these 5 things together, we can make a cup of tea with milk and sugar. But we need to think about how we get brewed tea, because it's not clear how we get brewed tea. So what we need is we need a way to make brewed tea. Now you could make it with a teapot, with maybe a tea bag or some loose tea and some boiling water, or we could brew the tea in the cup using a tea bag with boiling water. So let's say we're going to brew the tea in a cup using a tea bag. This changes the diagram somewhat, because to brew the tea in a cup, we need the cup to brew the tea. So what we need to do is we need to change the name of brewed tea in a cup, of brewed tea here. We need to change this to say brewed tea in a cup. And in order to get brewed tea in a cup, the cup actually becomes a subproduct of brewed tea in a cup. So in order to have brewed tea in a cup, we need a cup, we need a tea bag, and we need boiling water. And we'll connect those together so we can see that in order to get brewed tea in a cup, we need those 3 products. A tea bag, that already exists. A cup, that already exists. But the boiling water, that doesn't exist. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create the boiling water. And what do we need to make boiling water? Well, we need water and a kettle. So in order to complete this diagram, I'm just going to scroll down and duplicate one of these boxes again to show that to get boiling water, we need a kettle and we need some fresh water. I'm just going to call it water. So if we've got a kettle and we've got water, we can make boiling water. If we've got boiling water, a tea bag and a cup, we can make brewed tea in a cup. And if we've got brewed tea in a cup and milk and sugar and a spoon, we can make a cup of tea with milk and sugar. So that's the product breakdown structure. I'm just going to zoom out so you can see that in its entirety. So that's our product breakdown structure for making a cup of tea using product-based planning. And what we can see is that some of these things pre-exist. So things like milk and sugar and the spoon and the cup and the tea bag, they already exist. And so it's sometimes useful to color code these things. So I'm going to select the milk and the sugar and the spoon, the cup, the tea bag, the kettle, and the water. And I'm going to fill them with, we'll take a light blue color. And what I'm showing here, these are the things that pre-exist the project. They already existed at the start of the project. And we would call these external products. They're products that the project doesn't need to create. They already exist at the start of the project. There's milk in the fridge, there's sugar in the bowl, there's a spoon in the drawer. So all of those things that are light blue color, they existed before the project started. And what the project needs to do is it needs to create boiling water using the kettle and water, and it needs to use that water with a tea bag and a cup to create brewed tea in a cup. And then once it has brewed tea in a cup, it can use the milk, sugar and spoon to create a cup of tea with milk and sugar. So the product that the project was set up to create is this product at the top here. And I'm going to color that in a slightly darker blue. So that's called the project product. And if a project is being set up to create a number of things, so it's been told that it needs to create an A, a B, and a C, then you would have more of these project products on your product breakdown structure. And actually, it would be more sensible to have a separate product breakdown structure diagram for each product. So you would take these other products, you would move them onto a new page in Visio, and you would draw the product breakdown structure for that product on a new page so that people don't get confused about what products are feeding into what. So we've got our project product and we've got the external products, the things that exist before the project even started. We've got these two boxes in white. Now these boxes are called intermediate products. They are products that the project creates on its way to creating the project product. So it has to create boiling water first, then it creates brewed tea in a cup, and finally it's able to create the project product. So those terms are important. These intermediate products, boiling water and the brewed tea in a cup, they're also sometimes called internal products because they're inside the project and they only exist while the project is in flight, when the project is running. Once the project has used the boiling water, there's no more boiling water there. So that product ceases to exist when the project has used it. So these internal products or intermediate products have a short life. They tend to only live for as long as the project runs. In some projects though, and I've seen this, an intermediate product can be useful to the business in its own right, and it may need to be handed over to the business. And if a product is going to survive beyond the end of the project, we call this a persistent product because it persists, it carries on after the project has ended. And normally it will be handed over to somebody in the business to look after. So that's our product breakdown structure. I'm going to switch back now to PowerPoint. So I'm going to stop sharing just to make sure we are sharing the screen. So what we've got here is basically the same diagram. The color coding is slightly different. I've got the external products color coded in the sort of turquoise color. The intermediate products are white, and the project product at the top is the right color as well. So they're the terms that we need to be aware of. The project product, the intermediate products or internal products, and the external products. And we also mentioned persistent products as being something that exists after the project has ended and is used by the business. So the project product is usually a persistent product, but there may be other intermediate products that persist after the project has ended. Now, Prince 2 also mentions the idea of something called management products. And management products are a form of internal product that the project creates in order to manage itself. So if you are running a project and you're using product-based planning, it's quite convenient to think about the other things that a project creates, like its project plan, its risk log, its PID, project initiation document, to think of all of those things as being products or deliverables, and to talk about them in terms of being an intermediate product of the project. So your plan would show the creation of all of these products, including any management products that you need to create, like a risk log, like a project initiation document. So those documents that the project creates for itself, they're called management products because they're used to manage the project. Okay. So there's more of a definition here, a more formal definition of the things that we've described as being the different types of products. I'm going to leave that on the screen for just a moment. You can pause the video to review these, to remind yourself as to what these products are. The only thing we haven't mentioned are non-persistent products. So these are deliverables that are not going to be retained, or possibly can't really be identified as a distinct item after the project has closed down. So anything that's not going to be kept, or anything that isn't identifiable as a product after the project has ended, would sometimes be called a non-persistent product. So we've got our product breakdown structure, and the next step in product-based planning is to identify the dependencies between products to define the sequence in which they can be created. Now, some of the dependencies are shown on the product breakdown structure. If you need boiling water to make brewed tea in a cup, then there is a dependency there on having boiling water. But you also need a cup, and you also need the tea bag, and you may, in a more complicated project, need other things. So it's usual to draw a product flow diagram that just makes it clear the order in which products are to be created. Because if you cast your mind back to our product breakdown structure, that structure doesn't tell you anything about the order in which you need to do things. Just like a work breakdown structure doesn't tell you everything you need to know about how an activity-based project plan is going to work. You need to have a product flow diagram for product-based planning to show you the correct order in which to create your products. And we also need to mention risks, because creating every product, whether it's an intermediate product or the project's product, has risks associated with it. And when you're creating your risk log, you can examine each product that the project is going to create in turn and think about what are the risks that we're going to come across as we try to create this product. What are the things that are going to stop us being successful in creating this? And you can create your risk log in that way by thinking about the risks for each product. And then you would move on to think about how you mitigate your risks. So mitigating a risk might require the creation of a new product. It might require a change to an existing product. And we'll see how we might change the product's description on the next slide. Or in the same way we mentioned with activity-based planning, there is the opportunity for risks to be owned outside of the project. That means that it doesn't require the creation of a new product and it doesn't change anything about any of the existing products that we're going to create. We give the risk to somebody who is outside of the project for them to own it and deal with it. And so once we've identified all the products and we've understood the order in which they can be created by drawing a product flow diagram, we then need to describe them, and we'll look at how products are described on the next slide. Because in order to estimate the activities and resources necessary to create each product, you need to understand what the product is. You need to understand how big it is, how good it needs to be. You need to understand quite a lot about the product in order to discover what your estimate should be for creating it. So products are described in something called a product description. And in product-based planning, every product that the project needs to create should be clearly described in a product description. And the product description should describe what the purpose of the product is, so explain why the project needs the product. It should explain what its composition is, that is, what the product needs to consist of. So it might need to be 8 servers, it might need to be 30 trained staff. You need to explain what the product needs to be comprised of, what parts are there within the product. You need to describe its derivation. This is where this product comes from and what it's based on. So we're talking here about the dependencies. And we would look to the product flow diagram to understand what other products have to be available in order to create this product. So for example, in order to create brewed tea in a cup, one of the derivation items would be we need a product called boiling water, from our cup of tea example. So in the derivation section of the product description, you would describe what product this product is going to be based upon. What does it need in order to be built? The product description should also describe the form or format of the product. What should it look like? Should it be a Visio diagram? Should it be a Word document? Should it be an Excel spreadsheet? Do you not actually care what the format is, as long as it meets other characteristics? So the product description should specify the form of the deliverable, the product that's going to be created. And then finally, we need to think about what else do we need to create the product. We've mentioned the derivation, so what other products this product will be based upon, but we need to think about other dependencies such as tools and resource. So in order to create the product, what tools or materials or people do we need in order to create it? And that would go into a dependencies and resource section of the product description. And then finally, and potentially most importantly, we need to have some quality criteria or some acceptance criteria. Quality criteria and acceptance criteria are basically the same thing. We need to understand how good the product needs to be to meet the business requirements. So we need to understand how we're going to measure the quality. What tolerances might be allowed. So you might say that something has to be so good, but it can be plus or minus 10% of that quality. It's also important to specify who is going to measure the quality, because that's going to be another form of resource. When you're using product-based planning, the method naturally encourages you to think about the resources you need to build the product, but also the resources that you need to test the product's quality. And this is another way in which product-based planning may be better than activity-based planning, because it causes you to focus on the quality of the product that you're creating and to set from the outset how much quality is needed and identify who is going to test that. So you're thinking not just about who's going to create the product, but who's going to test its quality. And you're doing that during the planning stage of the project. And what we can say is that the product description effectively represents a contract between the project manager who has created the product description and the person or the supplier who is going to create the product, because these products can be very big. The product might be a warship. You might give the job of building the hull of the warship to a boatyard that builds warships. And that supplier, that boatyard, will build you a warship hull. And they will deliver that hull floating on the water, potentially for another organization to come in to fit out that hull. So the product description is effectively a contract between the project manager and the person or the supplier that's going to create the product. Because in the product description, we say what it is we need, why we need it, what it's supposed to look like, how it's built, and we agree what resources are going to be needed to build the product. So the supplier may say, well, I need 6 months in my shipyard and I need 300 men to build this. I've got 200 already, so I'm going to have to hire another 100. And so it becomes a contract between the project manager and the person who is going to create the product. But it also becomes a contract as well between the project manager and the business users who need the product. Because if the product matches its product description when it's built, so it's composed as it should be, its form is as it should be, and most particularly it meets the acceptance criteria, then the business people should have to accept that product into service. And so this is an important point. We've said that the product description is created by the project manager. But in actual fact, the project manager needs input from the business people who need these deliverables in order to particularly specify the quality criteria, the acceptance criteria, before the business people will accept that the product is good enough. So to create a product description, you need input from the people who are going to create the product, but you also need input from the people who are going to use the product, because it's those people who are going to use the product who know how good it needs to be, and they will help the project manager specify the quality or acceptance criteria that's going to be used to measure whether that product is good enough. And if the product is good enough, then the business users have to accept it at the end of the project. Check the notes. And just to wrap up on product description, so most organizations that use product-based planning will have a template that they use for product descriptions. And they will use that template to make sure that they capture all of these points: the purpose of the product, how it's composed, the derivation, the form, the dependencies, the quality criteria, the resource requirements needed to create the product and to test it. They will use the template to make sure that they gather all that information. So we need to talk about when product-based planning is used in the project lifecycle. And what we can say is that product-based planning takes place anytime a plan needs to be created. Usually organizations will either use activity-based planning or they will use product-based planning. Sometimes this will also be combined with the agile methodology that we're going to look at next week. And we'll talk in that session on agile about how agile can be combined with activity-based planning and with product-based planning. But while we're talking about product-based planning, we can say that anytime a plan needs to be created, you can use product-based planning. So that means you can use it during the initiation stage, when you need to start creating a high-level plan for the whole project, and also when you're creating the plan for the planning stage. And during the planning stage, when you're planning the delivery stage, you can use product-based planning. But when you consider that the delivery stage actually involves testing the delivered products to check that they meet their acceptance criteria, you could say that actually you're using product-based planning all the way through the project lifecycle, right the way through to close down, because you plan the project in terms of the products that are to be delivered, you describe the products in a product description and create some acceptance criteria, and during the delivery stage, you build those products and you test them to see if they meet the acceptance criteria. So that's where product-based planning sits in the project lifecycle. I'm going to talk just briefly about quality criteria and acceptance criteria again. Just a couple more points I wanted to make. So they are basically the same thing. They're testing that a product is fit for purpose. And we've said that if the quality criteria for a product are met, then the product must be accepted by the business. It's not acceptable for the business to come along at the end of the project and say this isn't good enough, when at the start of the project they had the opportunity to define exactly how good it needed to be in order that the project could plan to deliver something that was that good. What we can also say about the quality criteria is that the more specific and measurable the quality criteria can be made, the easier it is to see that the product meets the criteria. And in the case of the project products, so these products, these deliverables that the business needs in order to solve the problem that the project was set up to fix, if we can make those, the quality criteria for those products specific and measurable, then there will be less uncertainty as to whether the project has actually delivered everything it needs to the right level of quality. If we can make those quality criteria measurable and specific. So for example, if we're thinking about a system, if we say that the system has to respond to every request that the user makes of it in 3 seconds, we can measure that, we can do all our testing, we can measure everything that every user might possibly do. And if we can show that the system always responds within 3 seconds, then we can say that it's met that quality criteria. Because we can measure it, it's easy, relatively easy to see that the system meets the criteria. If we'd been less clear, less precise, and we said the system needs to be fast when it's responding to user input or queries, then it's difficult to see what fast means. What does fast mean? Does fast mean it responds within 3 seconds or within 2 minutes? Would a week be a fast response? Well, for some problems it would be, but by being specific about it, we can be clearer as to whether the criteria has been met or not. And this raises the question as to who should write the quality criteria. And we've mentioned this before on the previous slide. We said really it should be the business people who are going to have to accept that product into service, into the business, in order to fix their business problems. They should be the ones that write the quality criteria because they're responsible for accepting the product. So if they don't say how good the product needs to be, it's very difficult for the project and the project manager to plan to meet that level of quality. So it's really important that business people are involved in writing the quality criteria. Okay. Another thing that I know from experience is that acceptance criteria and quality criteria are hard to write well. It takes a lot of thought and imagination to think, how do I describe how good this thing needs to be? If it's a system or a process, or if it's a product like a car or a production line. You need imagination to think about the quality criteria. But you really need to understand what are the essential qualities that the product must have if it's going to be fit for purpose. And you'll remember that the product description defines the purpose of the product as one of its elements. So we said that the purpose of the product was important. It's the first thing we describe. We say, why is this product needed? What's its purpose? What's it for? Once you understand what the product is for, it becomes a little easier to understand what the essential qualities that that product must have if it's going to be fit for purpose. And again, from experience, I can tell you that writing quality criteria takes practice. The more you write quality criteria, the better you get at it. It's a skill to do well. So if you get the opportunity to think about writing acceptance criteria or quality criteria, jump at the chance, try it. Don't expect to do a good job to start with, but get feedback on it from other people that are good at it. And the more you practice, the better you will get at writing these acceptance criteria. Okay. One final thing that we can say about quality criteria is that it's okay, if you need to, you can invent your own measures so long as you define them. So if you need a measure that is something other than time or quantity or some other measurable item, you can create a measure yourself. So you could, for example, say that the product should have no level 1 faults. But then you go on to define what those levels are. And so a level 1 fault is a critical fault. It's where the system crashes completely, or where data is lost, or where the screens take more than 10 seconds to refresh. If you have any of those faults, that's a level 1 critical fault. And the measure that we've said for a fictional product here is that the product should have no level 1 faults, and it should have not more than 2 level 2 faults and less than 10 level 3 faults. And we've defined what those levels are. So it is permissible to invent your own measures if the sorts of normal measures that you might use aren't suitable for how you want to define the quality. So don't forget that you can invent your own measures if you need to. Okay. So we've looked now at really 2 different ways of planning a project: activity-based planning and product-based planning. So we need to think about, is there something that recommends one of those methods over the other? And I think there is. And what I've got on the screen now is a number of reasons why we would say that product-based planning is better than activity-based planning. And these are some of the reasons why the PRINCE2 methodology also recommends using product-based planning. Remember, we said that activity-based planning was the classical method of planning a project. It's a method that goes back to the earliest of civil engineering projects, such as building the Great Pyramids of Egypt. And ultimately, activity-based planning comes down to a to-do list. What are the activities that need to be done? And you'll remember when we looked at activity-based planning last week, we saw how using a software tool, all of the tasks that we needed to perform were all described using a verb. So the verbs were things like take or give or make or build or test or whatever those verbs are. They're all verbs, they're all actions doing words. Now with product-based planning, on your plan, what you would record are not the tasks to create the products, but the products themselves. So you would create a product called cup of tea with milk and sugar. That would be shown on your plan. But usually it would be shown at the end of the project because that's what you're trying to build. And what you would have earlier on in the project plan is you would have all the intermediate products that the project needs to create first in order to have a cup of tea with milk and sugar. And so in a project plan that has been built using product-based planning, you don't see verbs, you see nouns. You see the names of things. So cup, tea, brewed tea, milk, sugar, kettle, water. You see the names of things. And so when we're thinking about why product-based planning is better, we can say that it's better than activity-based planning because it focuses on the deliverables and not on the work. And it focuses on the quality of those deliverables. Activity-based planning doesn't tell you anything about how good the thing you're trying to build needs to be. Product-based planning does. It focuses on the deliverables and how good they need to be, and it forces you to think about those early on in the project so that you can specify the acceptance criteria and you can involve the people who are going to accept those products into service in defining what the criteria are. It removes any ambiguity of expectations because it describes the product. People can talk about the product description. They can start to visualize what the product is going to look like, how it's going to work. And it can reveal critical assumptions and critical constraints that don't come out when you're doing activity-based planning. It also allows the effective delegation of tasks. So you can delegate creating a particular product, like a warship in the example we mentioned. You can delegate that job to somebody else. And it doesn't matter whether they're going to use product-based planning or activity-based planning to deliver it. You don't need to know that detail. You just give them the job of building the ship's hull. They deliver you a ship's hull. It also confirms what's in and out of scope for the project. We talked about scope and how you might define scope, and we said the scope is the planned impact of the project. And if you look at all of the project's deliverables, you can see all of the impact that those deliverables are going to have. So it does confirm the scope quite naturally as a byproduct of product-based planning. It also involves users in the specification of their requirements in a more fundamental way, because users are involved early on and they're asked to specify what it is they need and how good it needs to be. Now, we'll see next week when we look at Agile, that one of the reasons that Agile has become more popular is that Agile does allow the users more time to figure out what it is they need and how good they need it to be. Using product-based planning, there's a lot of pressure on users at the front of the project to decide what they need and how good it needs to be. With Agile, that requirement is spread out a bit better. And this is one of the reasons why potentially Agile is an improvement on product-based planning. But both Agile and product-based planning involves the users in specifying their requirements in a more fundamental way than activity-based planning does. With activity-based planning, we might talk to the users about what tasks they can foresee and needed, but that doesn't really help describe the deliverables of the project and how good those need to be. It focuses on tasks too much. Product-based planning focuses on what needs to be delivered and how good it needs to be. It also provides a more meaningful way to measure progress within a project, because as the project goes along, it is creating products. And for a while, the project may not create any products. And so it might appear that it's not done much. But if it is moving towards delivering a product, then it is making progress. And in a large project, you may have 30 or 40 products that need to be delivered. If those products are all of the same size, then one way you could report your progress is to say, well, there are 40 products that need to be delivered. We've delivered 20 of them, and because they're all of a similar size, we can say we're halfway through the project. So it does give a more meaningful way of measuring progress within the project, because you're not just looking at what tasks are done, you're also looking at what's actually been delivered and how close you are to delivering everything that the business needs. Another strength of product-based planning is it allows decisions to be made in relation to the risks and benefits of specific, particular, individual deliverables. So the project may be set up to deliver 8 things, but it may be short of money. So in the steering group, you can have a discussion with the steering group about, is the best way to save money to not deliver the 8th product? If we deliver the first 7, don't do the 8th one, that will save time and money. Is that an acceptable decision for the steering group? And so you can look at the products that are being delivered. You can say, well, this particular product is very, very risky. None of the other products are. It's going to cost more to make this one product than it will take to make all the other 7 products. Should we perhaps stop work on this 8th product just because it's too risky? And the final thing we would say as well is that it allows the impact of changes to be assessed more easily, because if somebody comes along and wants to change some aspect of the project, what you can do if you've used product-based planning is you can think about, what does this change affect? Does it change any products? And if it does change a product, what is it changing? Is it changing the acceptance criteria? Is it changing the composition? Is it changing the purpose or the format? So you get a better way to think about the impact of changes on the project when you're using product-based planning. So at Knowledge Pool, we would actually recommend that projects are planned using both product-based planning and activity-based planning. So at a high level, we'd recommend that projects should be planned using product-based planning so that the deliverables that are needed and the quality criteria are clear. But at lower levels, when you're actually planning the creation of specific products, it can be more appropriate, if the product doesn't break down any further, to drop down to activity-based planning, which is identifying the tasks and the subtasks that are needed to create and to test the products. And we can say that you can also use Agile at these lower levels. So Agile sprints can be modeled as activities that, for planning and estimating and scheduling purposes, we can say that we're going to repeat these Agile sprints a number of times. And we'll see next week when we study Agile what a sprint is and why actually you would repeat the sprint a number of times. But we can model Agile sprints as activities within an activity-based planning model. And we mentioned this earlier as well, this last point on the slide, which is if we're delegating the creation of a product to another project or to a supplier or to an individual, then that responsible party can decide how they're going to manage the creation of the product. It should be of no concern to the project how the product is going to be developed, only that it meets its product description and its acceptance criteria. So if the person who's going to create the product wants to use product-based planning to create their product, they can do that. If they want to use activity-based planning, they can do that. If they want to use Agile, they can do that. If they want to do it as a to-do list on a whiteboard, they can do it. Because we're delegating the task to them, the task of creating the product, the project itself no longer needs to worry about how that product is going to be created. We just need to know that we have somebody that's responsible for creating it, and that person will tell us via their planning method how long that product is going to take to create. So in our shipbuilding example, the shipyard would come back to us and say, yep, with our 300 staff, it will take us 5 months to build the yacht, build the ship, the warship, but we're going to tell you that it's going to be ready in 6 months because we need that extra month in case of snags or problems. So plan on the ship being ready within 5 to 6 months. So this is why we would recommend combining product-based planning and activity-based planning. So in summary, product-based planning does offer some significant advantages over activity-based planning, but activity-based planning is still useful for planning the tasks that are necessary to create each product. Product-based planning focuses on what needs to be delivered and the quality criteria of those deliverables. The process starts with the products or deliverables that the project needs to deliver, and it decomposes those and breaks them down into lower level, smaller products that can be created by the project. And all the dependencies between the products are identified on a product flow diagram. And if you have that product flow diagram, you can put it into the same sort of tool, software tool that we were using last week, and you can schedule the project using the critical path method. You would write product descriptions and quality criteria so that it's very clear what it is that needs to be delivered and how good those things need to be to meet the requirements of the business. And as you're assessing risks during planning, you're doing this so that you can see if there are any new products that need to be created or any existing product descriptions that need to be changed, or the risk might be owned outside of the project. But there's no other way to deal with a risk. It either requires a new product to be created, or it requires an existing product description to be changed. And it does allow a change request to be assessed in terms of the impact of the change request on all the products. So you can see, what does this change actually impact? Does it impact product A? Does it impact the product description for product A? Where does it have its impact? So you can assess the impact more easily. So that's our session on product-based planning. Thank you for joining me and bearing with me. The video of this night's session will be available on YouTube tomorrow. There's no assignment in the session tonight.
Okay.
So do you have any questions?
Not on this. I just my question is the difference between is outside this. So my question is difference between Prince 2,
yes,
and the other two. What's the major difference?
Sure. Okay. So Prince 2 is a complete methodology. Product-based planning is only a small part of Prince 2.
Okay.
Yeah. So within Prince 2, it covers lots of different aspects of how projects are organized. So it talks about how steering groups are organized, how decisions are made.
Okay.
It talks about the standard documents that projects should have. But when it talks about how you should plan your project, Prince 2 does recommend using product-based planning for all the advantages that we've seen tonight.
Okay.
Yeah. So our Knowledge Pool's Introduction to Project Management course isn't designed to be an introduction to Prince 2 particularly, but we mention it because it's an important method. So we don't go into a lot of the other things that Prince 2 mentions, but we do talk about product-based planning. Is that okay?
Yes, very okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions?
No, that's all.
Okay. Right, if that's fine, then what I'll do is I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll end the recording, and I'll